So it's been a little bit of a break since we've been out of 1 Corinthians. This is us jumping back in as we study through the book of 1 Corinthians. So just as a wee bit of a reminder, Corinth was the kind of cosmopolitan city, kind of busy, bustling place, lots of merchant traffic flowing through it, a place where everyone gathered and lots of different people and cultures mixed at that time as they flowed through Corinth. And it was well known as being a centre of immorality. So that was something that was very well known for. And if anyone went to Corinth, they would know that going into Corinth. We looked at before how the temple of Aphrodite stood on the hill overlooking the city, and that's the place where there was the temple prostitutes, essentially, about 1,000 temple prostitutes in that place. And the people would go up there and spend time with them, and we'd put that under the banner of religion, worshipping Aphrodite at that time. And we looked at the last time, or a couple of times back, how the church didn't even speak against that. They accepted that and okayed that to go on as well. So Apostle Paul had founded this church, and he's at this point where he's been away and he's had reports back about the church, and he's having to address and answer certain things that's going on within the church at that time. So some questions have been posed to Paul, and Paul's going to give some answers back to them. But before this point, he wanted to deal with some things that he was aware of. So we looked at, before this point, about division within the church, division within the fellowship. And Paul wanted to give them instruction on division and how we had to be unified together and working together as part of a conjoined fellowship. He has addressed immorality in some aspects up to this time. And the last time we looked at 1 Corinthians, it was about lawsuits, about suing one another, about getting external people involved in things that should have been kept internal. Now Paul, as we get to chapter 7, he deals with questions about marriage. And problems in marriage have been about since people have been about, because join two people together and you're going to come up with some issues, and people are going to have skirmishes, and there's going to be some frictions between man and wife. Yes, avoid eye contact with your partners, people, that's the way to do it. Yep, so that can happen. And Paul's addressing some aspects as we get to this here. And one of the commentaries by Warren Wiersbe says this: as we read this chapter, keep this in mind. He says, 1, Corinth was noted for its immorality and lack of standards for the home. So we've got to keep that context in mind. 2, Paul is dealing with local problems at that time with some groups of believers. And we might not face the exact same circumstances today, but we can take the principles out of it. And 3, as time would go on, the church would be under a time of persecution as well. So that's kind of a general sphere of things that are going on at that time. So as we look at chapter 7, Paul is going to discuss some problems of certain groups of believers. We've got the unmarried Christians from verse 1 to 9, and Christians married to unsaved partners in verse 10 to 16. And just married people in general, and how that links to being single as well. So I put the title today, Marriage and Singleness, but that's going to cover a few different sermon series. We'll need to kind of revisit that. And this in 1 Corinthians is not a kind of all-out instruction about marriage. We've got to go to other places in the Bible to get a fuller picture. So bear in mind the kind of link and the progression here as Paul has been addressing the people in Corinth. We've talked about some right nitty-gritty subjects up until this point: prostitution, incest with a man sleeping with his father's wife. So, it's a wee bit kind of, makes you kind of squirm in your seat a little bit. And I suppose today is not going to be much different for me anyway. So when we get to church, we often talk about a 3-letter word that begins with an S that we all deal with. And we all go, what's that word? It's no sex yet, man. It's sin. It's sin, the 3-letter word sin that we talk about all the time. But as has been so rightly said, sex is what we're talking about today in some aspect, because it is one of the topics, husband and wife together. There's intimacy, there's sex, there's all these things that come into play. And just the way my humour was going, last night we did our men's supper, and I was sitting beside Graham Bridges, and Graham was speaking about the songs for today and how, don't know what you're speaking on tomorrow, but it's quite good how God often kind of brings the songs together. It's like, well, show me he said, let you see the set list. I was like, Yeah, it's a bit of a strange passage, so I'm not quite sure which song directly links into the scriptures this morning. But in my humour, I was singing the 90s song by Salt and Pepper, Let's Talk About Sex. It's not one to sing in church, that's the song that's going through my head. So we're going there this morning as we get to this context here. So I might go the colour of my shirt at some point, so you'll just need to forgive me. So it says here, we're going to read from verse 1 to 9 for context. So it says, "Now concerning the things which you wrote to me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Nevertheless, because of sexual immorality, let each man have his own wife, and let each woman have her own husband. Let the husband render to his wife the affection due to her, and likewise also the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except with consent for a time, that you may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again so that Satan does not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. But I say this as a concession, not as a commandment. For I wish that all men were even as I myself, but each one has his own gift from God, one in this manner and another in that. But I say to the unmarried and to the widows, it is good for them if they remain even as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion." So Paul starts out in verse 1 here, and he's quoting a question in a letter that he received from the believers at that time. And we can presume it says something like, New King James says, is it good for a man to touch a woman? If you've got an NIV, it says, is it good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman? So we're really talking about intimacy, physical intimacy, sex at this moment in time here. And what this is a twisting of probably a teaching that Paul had given the believers previous to this point here, and a correct teaching where Paul would have been saying to them that the flesh is evil, your kind of fleshly lusts and desires that can lead you into sin and into difficult, dark places. In spirit, we know the scriptures, spirit and the flesh war against each other. Which one's going to win is the one you're going to feed. And that's probably the context of where this question has came from. Paul wrote in Romans 7, chapter 7, verse 18, "For I know that in me, that is in my flesh, nothing good dwells." So that's probably the kind of baseline where this kind of question is coming from. If there's nothing good in our flesh, then we shouldn't be doing anything kind of physical with each other, because that must be sin, because the flesh is inherently sinful. So the Corinthians are maybe taking this to two extremes. Maybe it seems that there's kind of two groups of philosophy at that time. The first group saying, okay, flesh is wicked, we'll never be pure, so if we're never going to be pure, do what you want. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, get on with it, do it, whatever you want. Just live it up exactly as you want to do it. And that's kind of the Corinth culture. Anything goes and you'll get away with it. Busy, bustling city, go to the temple prostitutes, go to the people in the streets, do whatever you want. That was the kind of place that Corinth was. The second group seemed to sing from the hymn sheet of, because the flesh is evil, everything that it desires should be forbidden. If flesh is evil, stay away from all kind of fleshly things, or all physical things, and that will make you a holy, holy person. Stay away from everything physical, and that will make you more holy before God. And in that context, it would seem that even married people began to abandon the kind of sexual intimacy with each other because they thought that was more pleasing to God and it made them more holy than other people. And Paul is addressing that situation here and giving them the kind of the instruction on that situation. So it seems, as I said, that sexual immorality was such a danger that people were trying to make themselves pure, but they were getting their thinking slightly askew, as we all can with certain circumstances in our lives. So denial of the flesh was causing people to fall into sin, because as Paul will continue on to tell us, it is sinful to deny that type of intimacy in this setting here. So Paul goes on to advise on the matter and give an explanation. And he says, great, abstinence, celibacy is fantastic, it's great, if you're not married. If you're not married, then that is the case. But those that are married should stop denying each other, because there's a special relationship between a husband and a wife, and a married relationship that is not sinful, and it's ordained by God. Hebrews says in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 4, marriage is honourable amongst all, and the bed undefiled, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. God's not judging a married couple for being intimate with each other, but he will judge those out with marriage for going into those circumstances, for adultery, for all these other things that go on that God is not honoured within. In marriage, two become one flesh, and that's not always physically, emotionally, always, every way you can imagine, two are to become one. You're so united with your partner. So verse 2 says, because of sexual immorality, let each man have his own wife, and let each woman have her own husband. So in light of the danger of immorality, which was rife within the culture in Corinth at this time, as I said, this is really talking about any form of sex out with marriage. It is appropriate for a man to have a wife and for a wife to have a husband, and I choose those words carefully. That is the married situation that God blesses. And what Paul is giving the Corinthians is just one of the solutions to immorality, and that is to stay faithful to your spouse. That is one way to stay away from sin and immorality. And Paul's not saying, everyone, go get married. If you're single just now, go get married. That's not what he's saying. This instruction is to the married couples at this time. He deals with the issue later on that speaks to the unmarried people and the virgins, as I would say further on in the chapter. And also there's different situations where people find themselves without a spouse, without a partner. And again, we need to go to other places to build upon the full picture of marriage and singleness, which we're not doing today. We're kind of sticking to the main thrust of the Corinthian letter here at this moment in time. So have your own husband, have your own wife, stick to them alone. Each has their own. If they're yours, nobody else should be touching them. And if somebody else is somebody else's, you shouldn't be going near them either. You've got to keep yourself clear-cut with that regard. And I read this, which I thought was quite funny. It was apparently published in a newspaper years ago, I don't know what era, but in the time where it was kind of common nature for a man of daily business to go out and his daily newspaper and go home and things like that. So it was a question within a daily newspaper. The publisher put a question out, it was a competition, and the question was, why is a newspaper like a good woman? And people had to write in, and there was a winner for that. And the winning answer was, so why is a newspaper like a good woman? It is like a good woman because every man should have his own and not look at his neighbours. Oh. And I thought it was quite a funny way, but quite a good way to put it. We need to be careful of our interactions, of our desires, and our closeness with things that we shouldn't be close to and with. And obviously that goes vice versa for women towards men as well. So verse 3 goes on, let the husband render to his wife the affection due to her, and likewise also the wife to her husband. So Paul is saying that the husband and the wife, in some regards, they owe each other something. There's a debt, there's a due thing to each other that they should give, and that is physical intimacy. And it's quite a strange thing to say that you owe that to somebody else. It seems quite abusive if you look at it in that regard, but it's not that way at all. If you are united to your partner in a loving, committed relationship, then you're putting them first. God first, your spouse, your family, and then yourself after. Your desires are to please your husband, your wife in all aspects. And if that is the case, then this verse is not an issue because you're in that mutual exchange of emotion, intimacy in all aspects of your life. But it says that the husband and wife, they're due something. You come together in marriage, your spouse is due something from you. You don't just get married to somebody and then you live an independent life to hang with them. You've got a partnership there in lots of aspects of your life. It says, render to the wife the affection due to her, and likewise the wife to her husband. Render means to pay back, pay one's dues, speaks of an obligation. And again, that can sound quite, you're obligated to be physically intimate with your partner. That sounds quite strange, but again, we've got to look through the way Paul's looking at it. And when we think about marriage, man to wife, wife to husband, what is that showing? It's the relationship between God and his bride, us, his children, that we need to be committed to God fully, not be adulterers by looking beyond God or at other things. And we put God first. We want to be in a close relationship with him in all aspects of our life, to be vulnerable to God and open to God. And that's reflected in the marriage relationship. That we should be willing to be vulnerable in all aspects to our spouse, to open ourselves up in all aspects, emotionally, physically, spiritually, all these things. And I'm not saying that's always easy, but we see the kind of principle here within the book. It's essentially it's wrong for a man or a wife to withhold affection from their spouse. And note here the word affection doesn't just mean sex. The three-letter word, it means affection as well. If you're looking for one without the other, then there's something wrong in that situation there as well. There's going to be problems within your marriage. The two come hand in hand. So Paul emphasises that, what is needed is not just sexual contact, but the affection due to the person. So that kind of emotional affection, bond and contact as well. And without that, then there's something that's due to the other person that you're not giving. And we need to obviously search our own hearts and minds and our relationships with that. And as we come to this study, you might think, well, how does that relate to me? Maybe you're not in this situation where this relates to you directly. But it's building a picture of who God is, relationships, and when we are dealing with other people, Christian relationships, non-Christian relationships, we know and we understand what they should look like. That a marriage between Joe Bloggs out in the street that doesn't know God and a relationship between a Christian couple should be different, because it should be based on what God outlines to us. So it's teaching, it's information for us. And as we look across culture today where marriage and divorce and things are so rife, there's no commitment there. You can get married and you can just as quickly get divorced without a second thought, and many people do. I didn't look up the actual stats, but I'd seen some, it was American statistics, but I'm sure it applies to us today as well, that the number of divorces has actually dropped quite a bit. And that's the problem of statistics. And the reason for that is because people just suddenly getting married in the first place. Don't get married, you don't need to get divorced, that people just shack up and they'll maybe have friends for benefits for a wee while and then go and live with somebody and then just swap partners every so often, and that's just the way things go now. So divorce rates are going down because people aren't committed to a monogamous relationship with other people. Corinth was a situation of immorality, and today we've got the exact same as well. So Paul here is strongly putting forth the idea that there's mutual responsibility in marriage for physical intimacy and general affection. So husband, you've got an obligation to your wife in both regards, and the same wife to husband. It's not about demanding, it's not about you get a duty to me, it's about in a loving, exchanging relationship that you're happy with how things go and you've got this mutual willingness to each other. So Paul goes on to expand in verse 4, the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. So again, just show that in marriage, you're bound together. You have willingly bound yourselves together before God in commitment to each other. And in that, you've released your rights. You to your husband to you. You're saying, I give myself to you in all ways, and the husband does the same to you. This does not justify abuse or coercing or any of those circumstances at all. And sometimes that's what these verses get used at. A verse out of context without all the kind of surrounding information. You need to give me, that's what I'm due. Do it. And that's really not what we're seeing here. We've got to think about the whole context of commitment and relationship together. And a fuller picture of marriage is seen in Ephesians 5, and I'll just read that out. In Ephesians 5, verse 22 to 33. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as also Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Saviour of the body. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of the water of the word, that he might present her to him a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cleanses it, just as the Lord does for the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh, of his bones, and for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. So men are always head of the home. That is the biblical way of doing things. I know today that goes against the grain for some females and gender equality and things, but that is the biblical account, and there's so many scriptures that back that up. What is the husband's responsibility? To love his wife as he loves the church, as he loves Christ. If the man would always do that, then everything else would fall into place, because the female would be willing to submit to the man that does the right thing. So we just need to think in our own circumstances. Are we doing the right thing? Do we behave the right way? Have we got the correct attitudes? Are we being the right type of people before God? And that's something we can search our own hearts with. Verse 5 says, do not deprive one another, except with consent for a time, that you may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again so that Satan does not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. So essentially, Paul would say, okay, relations between husband and wife are God ordained, they're commanded, they're good, there's nothing dirty, there's nothing bad about it, it's good, it's what God expects, as is general affection and connection with your spouse as well. And Paul's saying here, do not deprive one another. Don't think by doing that you're more holy than somebody else. Don't think that by doing that you're gaining brownie points with God. And that is the context here. Married couples are abstaining, thinking that they're being more holy. They were denying the flesh and being more pleasing to God. Paul's saying that deprivation in either sense, either lack of physical intimacy or lack of affection one to the other, will lead to issues. And it can lead to sin creeping in and the other person being tempted. Tempted to what? Well, we don't really need to fill the picture in too much, but tempted for other people. Tempted to go into situations where they shouldn't be, to find fulfillment elsewhere, therefore destroying the marriage, the commitment that they've made to each other before God. So Paul's lesson here is that your relationship with your spouse is one of God's ways to keep you away from immorality, to keep you away from adultery and all these sins that won't lead you down a wrong path. But that's just part of the answer. It's not going to solve every issue in your life. If you don't deal with these issues, then there's going to be a problem down the path for you. Sometimes as well, this verse is taken out of context as well. If you don't fulfill your obligations, then I'm every right, I will go elsewhere. You know, it's your fault if I committed adultery because you've not done X, Y, or Z. And that really isn't how we can read that verse at all. We are always accountable to our spouse and to God for how we behave. We cannot put the blame on another person at all. And Paul says here that abstaining from physical intimacy should never happen unless the people have agreed to do it for a specific purpose. And here the specific purpose is said is if you want to fast and pray together as such. He says, in that situation, then you consent to do that for a time. But Paul's saying that that's really, it's a concession, that's not a command. You don't need to do that, but if you want to do it, then that's the only kind of valid reason at that time. So withholding intimacy should never be used as a weapon, one spouse against another, to get back at another person or to get something which you want. And sometimes that can happen within marriage relationships as well. When you do that, you're going down a bad path, and that's going to lead to even more trouble. So as I said, verse 6 says, but I say this as a concession, not as a command. So there's an allowance to the situation here, but it's not a command. You don't need to abstain for fasting and for prayer, but if you should wish to do so, that is a valid reason there. I suppose the general gist of this is Satan's strategy. Satan wants to get a foothold in your life. Temptation, sexual temptation, is one of the major ways that he does that. Even within church circles, how many pastors and church leaders do we hear of that fall into sin by being in a relationship with somebody that they shouldn't be? Whether it's physical or even just emotional, getting connected with somebody that they shouldn't. And Paul's just saying, be careful of that situation. This is one of the ways to stop that from happening, to have the proper relationship, you and your spouse together. And Satan, if he can encourage a partnership, a female, a man, a woman married together, to have a divide between them, whether it's physical or emotional, he's got a foothold there, and he will expand that divide, and the marriage will end up in troubled grounds. So Paul goes on in verse 7 to say, for I wish that all men were even as myself, but each one has his own gift from God, one in this manner and another in that. The time that Paul was writing here, it would seem that Paul was unmarried. So I wish that all men were even as myself. So he was unmarried at this moment in time. And Paul's recognising the benefits of being single, which he'll speak to further on down the line in this letter here. But namely, the freedom and the independence to worship God, serve God in any way that God sees fit. You're not having to think about somebody else and your ties with other people, a spouse or a family. So Paul was seen as unmarried when he wrote this letter. But when we read elsewhere, we can deduce that he was married at some point as well. Most propose that Paul, because he was on the Sanhedrin, as we read in other scriptures, that he was married because you had to be married to be part of that Sanhedrin there. We see in Acts 26:10, this is Paul speaking. This I also did in Jerusalem, and many of the saints I shut up in prison having received authority from the chief priests. And that's a wee bit, I shut up in prison having received authority from the chief priests. Having authority means it was part of that kind of Sanhedrin, having authority to do things and make decisions. And to be married and to be in that situation was a requirement to be part of that group. So what happened to Paul's wife then? I don't know. I don't know, because we're not told in the scripture. We don't really know exactly. There could be some options, I suppose. Perhaps she died, maybe as a widower. She could have left him when he became a Christian. I don't know. I've not fully looked into it, but I know from scripture we're not told. There's maybe kind of historical accounts that maybe add some information onto that. But what we know is he's not married here, and he has been married. So Paul, we're seeing, is speaking as a man. He's an apostle of God, inspiration of the Holy Spirit, and he's got experience under his belt as well. So Paul's probably quite well qualified to speak of the gifts and the responsibilities of being married and being single, and perhaps is speaking from that life experience as well. And as I was thinking of that, I thought, that's actually quite an important wee point there. When we receive advice and counsel from other people, let's just put it out there, see if you're going through a situation, people know about it. A lot of people like to give you quite a lot of advice. But see, sometimes they should be holding their advice to themselves because it's not always wise counsel. And what I would advise is don't always listen to advice. Find yourself wise counsellors, whether it's the one or the two people you trust completely. You know that they're mature in the Lord, they know the word and they're walking good with the Lord. And trust those people. Because if you listen to the 10 or the 12 voices round about you, it's not going to be beneficial to you and your situation. I wasn't sure how to say this, but there's plenty, the word windbag came into my mind when I was doing my notes. There's plenty of windbags out there, isn't there? Definition being a person who talks at length without anything of value to say. And sometimes we're in that situation. People want to tell us blah, 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 and we walk away and we think, what have I got to do with that? And that's not been helpful at all. Choose your counsellors wisely. Choose your advisors very wisely. That's just the wee point I wanted to bring out from there. So Paul says, singleness is a gift. Being married is a gift. And we can say amen to both of them. Both are gifts. Both come from God. We trust our lives to God. And if we are single or married, we know that God knows our situations. And Paul's saying here that his own gift at this time is to be single. And that word for gift that he's using is the same word for gift as we see in 1 Corinthians 12. We get the full list of spiritual gifts that God gives into our lives. So each state, married or single, is a gift from God. And we've got to please and honour God no matter where we stand at this moment in time. So it's God's gift that would direct somebody in one direction or the other. But no one is gifted to be immoral, sexually immoral in their lives. If you're married, you need to be faithful to your spouse and keep your relationships on ground in that way. If you're single, then that's when you're called to be celibate, to abstain from sexual interactions with other people. And that's the real thrust of what Paul's saying here. Get things sorted. If this is your situation, this is what you do. If that's your situation, that's what you do. Don't get mixed up and don't get caught up in things that you shouldn't be. Married must live faithfully to their spouse, and the unmarried must live celibate and please God. But Paul's also a realist. He knows, okay, that's maybe quite difficult. So he says this in verse 8. I say this to the unmarried and to the widows. It is good for them if they remain even as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, let them marry. For it is better to marry than to burn with passion. When we look at the context and things as we go further on, the unmarried is referring to those that have been divorced and not yet remarried, rather than those who have always been single. So that's the unmarried that we're talking about here. And the widow, obviously those that have lost their partner through death. And Paul will deal further on with those who have always been single, never been married, to the virgins, it says at verse 25. So he says to these people here, he says to them to marry, if that's going to be the best for them in their situation. It's not based on marriage being more spiritual than being single, but just for them, that's going to be the best outcome for them at that time, based upon very practical concerns for their life. If being celibate is going to cause you an issue, if you don't think you can do it, then that's when you should find yourself a partner to be united with and in that monogamous relationship with. Then you should marry. And this is especially relevant for Paul in his days in Corinth when people are up to all sorts. Okay, if you need to be expressing yourself in that physical way, sexually, then you need to do it within the boundaries of what pleases God, and that's being married to the other person. And Paul's saying, well, to the unmarried and to the widows, it is good for them to remain even as I am. But if that's not an issue for you, if you can remain single, serve the Lord and do that, then do that. You know, if you can do it, please God that way and remain single. But if you can't, then go ahead and remarry and fulfill your needs in that sense. But again, we can look to other scriptures and we build upon this by other bits of scripture as well. Paul told Timothy in 1 Timothy 4, at the start, I think from verse 1 onwards, forbidding to marry was a doctrine of demons. So, marriage is not some bad, sinful thing you should stay away from, but it just depends on where you are and what you've got going on in your life. If it's singleness, if it's marriage, it's the best for you. But the antidote to burning with passion is to be married. To be married, because if you're not, then you're going to find yourself in some dangerous situations that don't please God. If you cannot exercise self-control, then get married. It's not good enough to say, okay, God, I couldn't control myself there, I'm sorry. What's a fruit of the Spirit? Starts with love, everything comes to love. Love, joy, patience. Self-control comes within that list as well. If we're walking with God, we've got the Holy Spirit, we're trying to trust God, then self-control is a fruit of the Spirit as well. So we can't blame God if we aren't exercising self-control in our lives. So, what is it saying? Okay, you find yourself single, widowed, whatever, you're burning with passion. What do you do in that situation? Well, you don't just run off and find somebody grabbing you, me, let's get married, let's go. You also need to seek the Lord in that situation as well, because there's nothing worse than being united to somebody that God has not ordained for you, to rush into something which you should not have rushed into. You need to find the correct partner, the partner that God leads you to. So in this situation, what do you do? A single Christian. Well, first of all, don't simply seek to become married just because you're single. Seek what God wants you to do in that situation. Don't just find the first person you come across and go, yep, you'll do, you and me, let's go. Off to the chapel. Seek somebody that you can love, you can trust, and you can respect. And that doesn't come overnight. We don't get to know a person's nature, character, and their walk with God overnight. That takes a little bit of time. People who simply want to get married for the sake of getting married risk getting married to the wrong person. And what a difficult situation that would be, to get married to the wrong person. Secondly, it's fine to be on the lookout as a single person for the right person. That's okay. But the best way to find the right person is for you to work on yourself and be the right person. Like attracts like. If you're not in the right place, what makes you think you're going to find this wonderful person to want to unite to you for life? You need to try be the best version of yourself before God. Work on yourself and then attract the right person to you. And third, until the right person is found, your energy should be directed to positive outlooks and positive things in your life. See how you can serve God, see how you can dedicate your life to Him and please Him. See what situations or circumstances you can serve the Lord within, and make your time positive. Lots of empty time can lead to lots of idle thoughts and temptations, so fill your time with positive things. And if you're single, if you're unmarried, maybe a wee change of mindset is quite good as well. Think that maybe this is the time that God has blessed you with to work in you, your relationship, you and God together, to mature you in your faith, to use you for His kingdom's sake, without other people around about you that you're having to concede to and think of as well. That's a benefit of singleness. So we need to give thanks to the Lord for our situation, whatever that may be, and be content within it and work on it. Work on ourselves in our situations as well. In singleness, a wee list of things that I found here which I thought were quite good. In singleness, it says, be grateful that you can have this. Freedom to be yourself. Freedom to obtain your own aspirations. Freedom to take risks. Freedom to use your time. Freedom of mobility. Freedom in financial planning. Freedom to nurture deep relationships with God. Freedom to lean completely on the Lord. Freedom to serve the Lord in any way. And Chuck Swindoll in his commentary also says this. He says, it is better to remain single than to choose a non-Christian partner. It is better to remain single than to marry someone who will hinder your spiritual growth. It is better to remain single than to marry someone for the wrong motives. What is the wrong motives? I don't know. You could fill the blank in there. Why do people get married for the wrong motives? The three-letter word again, SEX. Financial security, power, prestige, fear of being alone, or just because it's expected, okay? You're expected to go and get somebody else. But here's another wee list. It is better to marry. It is better to marry if our lives would be more complete with a partner. It is better to marry if God leads us to someone we love and someone who loves us with the love of God. It is better to marry if our relationship will illustrate Christ's love for His church. It is better to marry if we are willing to spend the rest of our days giving more than receiving. We need to get our own minds right about what we are seeking from somebody else and why. And when we're in a relationship with somebody else, who's at the top of the tree Is it God, then our spouse, and then ourselves? Or do we put our wants and our needs at the top of that tree? Ecclesiastes 4:9-12 says this. It says, 2 are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labour. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. So there's benefit to being with other people. But sometimes we look to other people to fulfill a need that we maybe don't need to fulfill. Other people can help us up. It doesn't just need to be a spouse. As part of our church fellowship, we've got other people round about us to fulfill those needs and those practical things in our lives. But when we're talking about the marriage relationship, living successfully in a marriage takes time, practice, and patience. And we need to understand when we are wrong in our situation as well and try and do something right about our wrongness to try and change our situation. Likened to ice skaters, I thought this was quite good. Ice skaters, they spend 8 hours a day in a rink with their partners, falling down and helping each other up, landing hard and then getting up once again. Sometimes in some marriages it can be like that. You've got to be willing to help each other up, to get back on your feet again and to move forward, and to do that for each other. So we need to work keeping our marriage vows for those that are married, because it's not always easy. People come across difficult situations, challenges, many things can take the feet from out under you. I'm sure it's not easy being married to me and I'll not make any eye contact. But why be surprised if that's the case when two sinners come together? We're not perfect, we bring our own imperfections into our relationships. But what we look at as marriage should be seen as permanent. It's a permanent thing. We're committing to each other until death do us part, as a lot of the marriage vows say. Until death do us part means we depart by natural causes. Doesn't mean you get to kind of take the other people out. Okay, I've had enough of you, out of here. So we need to kind of consider that marriage is a for life thing, that we've got to work through our marriages for those that are married and to please God and seek him in the situations. So it says in verse 10, now to the married I command, yet not I but the Lord. A wife is not to depart from her husband, and even if she does depart, let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. And a husband is not to divorce his wife. So remember in this chapter, Paul is answering questions written to him from the Corinthian believers, Corinthian church at that time. And he's already dealt with some of the questions to do with the merits of being married or single, that it's more spiritual to abstain from sex and have sex with your spouse. He said that's a load of nonsense, that's not what we're talking about here. Now he's going on to address a different group of people, and we'll look at that next time as we come to this book in Corinthians. But today, to conclude, well, we've said the 3-letter word that's quite uncomfortable, and I've not went just as red as my shirt, so I'm quite pleased with that. But God's not against sex at all. He's for sex in marriage, within a couple that are united to each other in that covenant before God. But he's also for abstinence and celibacy for those that are single. Sexual immorality was a whole sphere of the Corinthian church, the Corinthian city, and he's saying, this is the correct way to do things. This is what pleases God. He's also saying singleness is an issue for some people and how to deal with that. And we've all been single at some time or might be single in the future as well. Sometimes singleness is for a season. And he's given us some instruction for singleness within the scriptures here. And then we'll go on to expand more as we go further on in the letter at a different time. But today, we see that God calls us to certain relationships, and in his word he tells us how to deal with those relationships as well. And essentially what he says, immorality does not please God. So in the passage here we see that marriage is a gift from God. Abstinence for single people is a gift from God as well. Paul teaches that celibacy can be good, but it can also be tempting, and how to deal with that situation. We say that celibacy for married people is not good. Married people should, in fact, do the opposite, have regular physical connection with each other. And he's bringing it all back to the picture of marriage being a picture of Jesus Christ with his church, complete uniting together complete uniting together with nothing withheld, no bars held between them at all. So here what we're saying, I suppose, sex is serious, but it's only for marriage. Singleness is serious, it's for the Lord. And we'll go on to see next time that divorce is serious, and that should only be used in extreme cases. So we've got the Word of God here, and we see that the Word of God speaks in all situations. Sometimes it makes us squirm a little bit, but hey, that's good. If it makes us squirm, then we're listening, we're taking it on board. God has got instruction and guidance for us all, no matter what our situation in our lives is. What do we need to do? No matter what your subject, your topic is, put God first, then your spouse or your family, and then ourselves in all areas of our life. So we'll just close in prayer, and then I'll hand over for a couple of songs to finish us off. So Lord, we give you thanks for this instruction that we've got here about married life and about singleness from the Apostle Paul. Lord, I suppose in some aspects it's quite easy to be a bit confused and get things a bit skewed, as the Corinthian believers did here, Father. To help us just to understand what a marriage relationship should involve and should be, that it does involve physical connection with each other, Lord, as well as an emotional connection, Father. And that is something that should happen. And if it doesn't, Lord, that there's an issue there and it opens the door for Satan to get in, Father. But Lord, that's not everyone's point of life, Lord. Many people are single or find themselves in a place where they're widowed as well, Lord. And you do give instruction in those circumstances as well. As we continue through 1 Corinthians, just help us to understand what your picture is for your people. What your picture is for your people, Lord, how we deal with these situations. How we deal with ourselves in those situations as well, Father. Knowing that they all point to you. That special picture of you being united to your bride, the born-again church, born-again believers like ourselves here today. So we just ask you to use your word in our lives. Help us, Lord, to have a look at your word, Lord, to dive into it and see what you'd have to say to us individually as well. So as we now just go to finish with a couple of songs, Lord, just be with us, let your presence be with us, Lord, and just help us to focus on you, looking to put you first in all areas of our life. And to you, Lord, we look and give you all the praise, the honour and the thanks. In Jesus' name we ask. Amen.